Many people consider themselves a moral person. Many people consider themselves to be ethical. But what are morals and what are ethics? Now, morals come from the Latin moralia, and ethics comes from the Greek ethikos. So the context of morals, ethics is the Greek Empire. So it has a Greek context. And the Greek Empire was centered around Apollo. So it's devil worship. So morals and ethics are derived from devil worship. Let that be clear. So, if morals and ethics are derived from devil worship, centered around the worship of Apollo, then how can it be that people identify with these pagan Greek concepts and think that those pagan Greek concepts can be Christ-like? Let's go through it one more time. You have the Greek Empire, where you had ethics and morals. Ethics are codes of behavior, that means external behavior, that are expected of you in business, in finances. Morals have to do with the community, the roles you are assigned by society which you are expected to fulfill. So both are related to roles and acting. So, based on this, we can conclude that morals and ethics are just codified expectations, where they're codified in black ink, then we call them laws, and they are enforced by governments through law enforcement and prison systems, or they are unwritten expectations, which are still codified, and unwritten codified expectations are ethics when it relates to business and morals when it relates to emotional connection with others. So, when someone says they are a moral person, what are they really saying? They are saying that they have aligned themselves with the expectations of society. With what purpose? To be accepted and to get benefits from the community. When someone says they have ethics, it simply means that they follow the guidelines that are expected of them by the business world. So, you can have someone, let's say you had someone from the 18th century who was involved in slave trade. Most of the slaves that he captured from Africa died on its way. But when he arrived in the Caribbean with a few slaves were left, he never cheated in the sales. If he could only ask between 150 real to 200 real for a slave, he would ask between the two. So he never charged importers too much for the slaves. So he was considered an ethical person. When he was at home, he was very kind towards his children, and he avoided the rest of the community. He never bothered other people. And because not bothering other people is considered a virtue by many parts of the world, also back then, he was considered a moral person. So if he would have said he's a moral person, that he is upright, that he is sincere, that because he has ethics, people would have agreed with him. And he would have been correct. Even though he is evil and a reprobate. So how can this be? How can someone call themselves moral, that they have ethics, and at the same time, they're reprobate? It's possible because morals and ethics have nothing to do with genuine goodness. Morals and ethics have nothing to do with righteousness, with justice. Those are just codified expectations that people cling onto in the hope that they will avoid harm. Because this is how society works. They put a gun to your head and tell you to eat something. That thing you're supposed to eat is not good for you. But if you don't eat it, you'll likely be shot. If you do eat it, you'll get health issues afterwards. So if you do eat it, which is the smart thing to do to remain alive, you'll get a pat on the back. But later, when the health issues manifest, you're told, well, it's your problem. You ate it, right? That's how society goes. You are conditioned on the pain of death indirectly to conform to expectations. Codified expectations are what we call morals and ethics. So, morals and ethics are themselves are not good. They may be practical. For example, during slave trade, they had ethics on how to sell the slaves. They had morals on how to treat other white people or people who were not black. So they had morals and they had ethics, but what they were involved in was an abomination against the Most High. It was a crime against humanity. The Nazis had morals and ethics. And what did that lead to? Well, you can see it in Europe now. Most of the native Europeans today are still suffering the consequences of what happened during the Nazi era. The collective trauma was quite intense and is still working out till this day, even though people may not recognize it. So, why do believers, now I'm addressing believers now, why are believers holding on to morals and ethics? Did Christ command us to hold on to morals and ethics? Did he? No. Christ said, be wise as a serpent, yet innocent as a dove. Christ told us to be flexible and practical, to look at the bigger picture, and to do what's best at all times, powered by the Holy Spirit. So we don't operate by our own strength. We have nothing to prove. So, if Christ told us to be flexible, to be practical, because it's by being flexible and practical that we are successful, that we are prosperous. If that's God's will for you to be prosperous in the long term, then why are believers restricting themselves with toxic expectations of the world? Why? I'm telling you why. Most believers today never examined their current situations. They just got along with what was expected of them, thinking that if they are comfortable, easygoing people, that automatically Christ is glorified by that. There's nothing wrong with being easygoing, because being easygoing is part of being meek. And Christ said that the meek shall inherit the earth. Christ said that he was meek and humble, because Christ is meek and humble. Okay? So being meek, there's nothing wrong with it. Christ is meek as a lamb, but fierce as a lion at the same time. So there's nothing wrong with being meek as a lamb as long as you have the fierceness of a lion when it comes to walking by faith. That's why you're wise as a serpent, yet innocent as a dove. Okay? So, there's nothing wrong with meekness. But the moment you are so easygoing that you're willing to accept toxic restrictions which block you from walking in biblical prosperity, that is idolatry. And that is what most believers today need to be delivered from. There's another thing I need to point out to you. Most of the codified expectations we still cling on to. Yes, we were conditioned into them. That was not us. Nevertheless, along the line, unconsciously, we began to cling on to them. We began to agree with them. We began to identify with them. For example, it can be you grew up in a household where you were not even allowed to speak unless people asked you to. Which was a tough restriction because it means that your parents just wanted control. Now, you know deep down inside that that is not the way to treat other people. But now that you are older and you have internal discomfort, you also have this urge to control other people. So now you also become upset when people talk and they're not asked to talk. So you are clinging onto the toxic restriction of your parents because it's easier to cling onto the toxicity than to examine it, to acknowledge that you have become toxic also and that you need to be delivered. So it's easier to hold on to the restriction and to project the discomfort of this toxicity on someone else. And because often when you project on others, you get support, you can now feed off this support. So now you get narcissistic supply by being upset with people who quote unquote talk too much. It's too much according to you. And because you have others agree with you, now you feel at ease. So now you are operating on narcissistic supply. And at the same time, you're upset with people who are narcissists, but you're operating in a narcissistic manner yourself. And when people point this out to you, now you're in denial. Because now you need to face yourself. It's easy to have people to target. It's easy to be upset with others who talk too much or who have no manners. But it's not easy to face yourself and to give an account of you. Because that's the thing with this world. People always have their reasons, or better said, excuses for what they do or don't do. And there are times people don't even want to explain themselves, so they just use violence. Whether it's emotional violence or physical violence, they use violence just so they don't have to be challenged. That's the world. And now you have restrictions that tell you to leave people alone. And when you comply with this leaving others alone, BS, you're considered a moral and ethical person. Why? Why are you considered good when you agree with toxic restrictions? Because when you agree with toxic restrictions, you don't call people out. When you agree with toxic restrictions, you allow others to have a grip on you, a grip they shouldn't have. When you agree with toxic restrictions, you are contributing to the filth on the earth. And when you contribute to the filth, that means that you're not in a position anymore to open your mouth and address the filth in others, because others now can blackmail you with the filth you're contributing to yourself. And this is why extreme predators often get away. If, for example, you have a guy who is molesting children, he has molested over 100 children, and let's say that the community decides to turn on this guy. You know what he's going to say? He is going to point out all the defects that all the other people don't want to face about themselves, and he's going to say things like, okay, so I'm a monster, I agree with that. Okay, but why did all of you guys not listen to your children when your children were saying to you that something didn't add up? Why were you violating your own children by not listening to them? Yes, I'm a monster, I should be dealt with, I agree with that, but why didn't you listen to your children? So your children only have to validate you? Even if it means that they need to forfeit their own safety? Which parent, or let's say which human being in the right mind sacrifices the long-term well-being of their offspring just to be relieved? So when the extreme predator begins to open his mouth, everyone is embarrassed. Everyone becomes, how would I say, awkward. Nobody wants that. That's why in the world, extreme predators often get away, because people don't want to face themselves. Yet those same people that don't want to be challenged, that don't want to be called out, those same people who are cowards, they let extreme predators off the hook because they don't want to face themselves. Those same people consider themselves moral, consider themselves ethical, and those same people will attack you, violate you when you don't comply with their leave me alone BS. So, why are believers holding on to morals and ethics? Now, let's get one thing straight. If you are working in a branch, and in that branch they have guidelines to prevent conflicts with customers, okay, you do it. For example, if you work at, whether it's a bank or whether you work at a law firm, wherever you work, you have regulations on how to deal with clients, with customers. So you follow them for practical reasons. There's nothing wrong with that. Unless those regulations are toxic, then you need to find a way to get around them, if that's possible. You don't have to quit your job, but you can find a way to move around them where you can. So I'm not saying you should never, ever, for the moment, for practicality, align yourself with external expectations. We human beings, we need to have external expectations to get along as a species and to get things done. There's nothing wrong with that in itself. The moment, however, there are codified restrictions that cannot be accounted for, that people don't even want to account for, then you know it's idolatry. Then you know you are being scammed. And believers have been scammed way too long. Way too long. Because all those morals and ethics come down to the following. They want you to be stuck and dependent on the beast system. This was what it's about. Think about it this way. If you work at a restaurant as a waitress, and that's the only income you have little choice but to get along with the expectations of your employer and also the expectations of the customer. Because if the customers are not happy with you, the business of your employer will suffer damage, so you'll be fired. If the boss is not happy with you, you have an issue also. If your co-workers are not happy with you, then you have an issue also. So you have almost no option but to accept the yoke of conforming. Of course you conform because you're at the job, but it can go further than conforming. People can get away, customers could get away, your boss could get away, and your colleagues can get away with toxic expectations because that's your income, you need to be there. Let's say now you move back with your parents, or you move in with someone else. Now, the grip that they had on you on the job becomes less because you have more options. Now, there may be other things you need to consider because you've moved in with someone, because they may expect other things, but you get the idea. Most of the expectations people cling on to, they are out of necessity. But because people don't want to face this, they try to convince themselves that it's them that stands behind it. And if they stand behind it, if you stand behind something that's toxic, it's still toxic, whether you stand behind it or not. Let's say now you have multiple incomes. You have a YouTube channel, you have some music that is playing on the radio, you get income from there also, and you work as a waitress at a restaurant. Your attitude is different. People are going to notice your attitude is different because you're wealthy. So, are others going to get satisfaction by having a grip on you? No, they will not. Because if they become upset with you, you can just say, okay, sir, I'm gone, and you leave, and they're the ones left with their anger or whatever issues they have. So they can't vampirize you successfully, or they can't do it that easily when you're wealthy. All the morals and ethics of the world, when it comes down to it, they want you out of wealth. Because health and wealth go together. They want you in an impoverished state in which you have no other option than to get along with restrictions. And they want you to agree with those restrictions so that they can later use this agreement of yours with them to blackmail you. They will say things like, you should have never agreed with that, even though you had no other choice but to agree with it, or else because you were under threat. That's how the gaslighting of society is. All the morals and ethics of the world. Remember, the origin of it is the Greek Empire, where they worship the beast. They still worshiping the beast today. It's all designed to keep you in an impoverished state. But they can't openly tell you this. They can't. Because you would be shocked and your survival instinct would be triggered. So they have to mask the scam successfully to get your consent. Because once you've given consent to the scam, you become blind to the scam. Because if you didn't give your consent to the scam, you can still fall for the scam, but the moment you find out it's a scam, it's over. But if you gave consent to the scam, you've now invested in the scam. So if now you figure out later it's a scam, now you have cognitive dissonance and you have internal conflict. And now likely you will avoid dealing with internal conflict. So now the scam, even though you're not in agreement with the scam anymore, the scam still has a grip on you for a longer time, even though you may be out of the situation. That's how black magic works. Black magic can work without your consent. It doesn't need your consent because it's violent. Nevertheless, when you unconsciously, you don't have to do it on purpose. You don't have to be aware you've done it. But if you unconsciously consent to the scam, even when the scammers reveal it's a scam, you will have trouble processing it, and it may take you years to recover. That's how it is with the morals and ethics of this world. Now look, if there are codes of behavior, for example, I would say, if there's a code of behavior for a salesman that you shouldn't let me say, make the customer uncomfortable, okay, that's understandable. I'm not saying you should never align yourself temporarily for the moment with codes of behavior. Just realize that those codes of behavior have a context, and it's only in that context that they matter. The moment people become upset with you because you don't give in to some of their expectations that they themselves don't want to examine, so they have expectations they don't want to examine, they don't want to account for, so they don't want to be challenged, so you just have to put up with whatever expectation they have, and if you don't, they become upset with you and they violate you, and they always have the reason. Are those type of people you should want around you? No, they are cowards. They are cowards. See them for what they are. Well, that's it for this video. Always look at the bigger picture and be at peace.